You hear me?
I can now. Yeah, I was trying to get everything set up here. You can tell that I've had to go to court a few times because I'm always on time. I find it interesting that people come into meetings late. Just seems weird to me, but there you go. Now, I can be late for a lot of things, certainly doing projects, but there you go. It's me. How you doing, Jack?
I am well, sir. I am.
I deliberately put this sweatshirt on this morning for a few minutes to celebrate my victory last night.
What was the score?
Oh my God, it was 19 to 16, I think.
Wow.
It was very close. I mean, it just went, yeah, very close. Battle of mediocrity. Yeah, I have it kind of up here. What do you think of that? Well, is that what we're going to discuss? Because it disturbed me in some ways, which makes me think. So that's good.
Well, good. I mean, what we're talking about, James and I were just in a conversation this morning too. And good morning, anyone, anywhere out there. I believe we're under steam now. We are recording. And I have my headsets charged this week, so everyone I believe will be able to hear me. We've also noticed that some of the recordings have a lag in them, a minute or two in advance of the actual start, which we're trying to figure out and eliminate so that people aren't sitting through silence, though it could be a meditative opportunity to wait and listen and be patient. But anyways, welcome everyone, anyone, everywhere. And what you're talking about, Les, aside from the USC game last night, which is 19-6, that's a close win, is something that Herb K sent out. And I read and have worked with Herb for years and really appreciate and respect that he is unswerving in his commitment to look at this whole process and be as honest and open as possible. It doesn't leave me without some contest against some ideas and thoughts and such. But, we talk, we have a lunch every month or so. And, it's some of the most inspired conversations I have because despite my pushiness and my insistence and my demands, he is receptive and challenges me back. And it's a gainful conversation for me. I leave there always feeling that great potential, not of avoiding the fact that there are issues that people conflict over, but there are possibilities within those conflicts to look at things beyond the edges, beyond the limits, beyond the ideas that seem to be so set in stone. And that is inspiring because my sense is that desperation can lead to inspiration. What's seen as something I am causing and creating by investing in ideas that have limits that are not true. And I would say any idea that's limited can't be true because truth is unlimited by its nature. And if speaking in absolute terms, it very quickly melts the lines and boundaries and all that. The steps themselves are basically ideas that are asking us to look beyond the limits of the self-centered idea, the idea that who I am and what I am is only what I think. So if that is the case, and I see those limits and now look at the horizon, it's exactly what mariners did when they realized the horizon was not the end of the world. They began to look beyond it and say, oh, there's whatever's beyond that horizon, the islands and the oceans and the continents, they're all there regardless of whether we can see them. We just haven't approached them and as a result haven't bothered to see them. And I would say that's very, very good metaphor for this process that we're talking about here. So what were some of the things you saw in that disturbed you, Les?
Good morning. All right, so I think this goes back to the concept of either religion, understanding, belief in a higher power, God, supreme being, entity, whatever. Couple that with the context of our discussions involving reality. And one of the things that is a constant for me, and that's just for me, is that there was a certain amount of, even though it was hard to see or feel or touch that God, higher power, either looked like a man or was an actual.
We just lost you, Les.
I'm having some internet issues. So that God would be, seems like an actual being. But with my process of trying to learn, grow, and understand, when I use the concept of reality, spirit of the universe, interconnectivity, that there's a master plan, that reality is reality, I don't want to say so much that they come into conflict as much as it breaks down.
You mean the concepts breakdown? We're losing you again. We lost you, Les. So what we are discussing is an email that came out from Herb K. And Herb has done a lot of work. He's got 12-step programs online that you can go through in depth. The first one I did with him was probably 15 or 16 years ago, and it was a year-long program. And what it helped me to see, because he allows everyone of every type of persuasion into that discussion, while it's anonymous, it contains people who struggle with gambling, sex, food, relationships, codependency. And in the food program, there's 5 or 6 different versions that I came across while I did these, and I did it several times with him. But by opening it up to everyone, it became really clear to me that we were all struggling with the same thing. It was an experience. I had that sense of that, but I hadn't experienced it openly in a room with other people to see that consistently the problems that we were dealing with were mental, and that the issues that we were dealing with, while the symptoms were varied, all tracked back to this obsessive thinking. And I think I'm 37 years sober now. I think I did that with him when I had 18 years. And then did it a couple of further times because I'm a bit of a slow study and I can't take direction very well. So I'd get sort of washed over by so much information. I would just sit and listen and absorb it. And my sense is that's an intuitive sense of learning too, because it's really awareness. It's really awareness beginning to be noticed within thinking. So when I think my thinking has to determine awareness, I'm thinking backward, which is the whole basis of a lie, rather than notice. I am never unaware. I only think I'm unaware. If I'm thinking addictive thoughts, I'm going to think I'm unaware when in fact I know now I'm always aware. I just think I'm not aware because I've invested myself in a thought that has no basis, and my attention ends up being consumed by trying to maintain that thought because I think it is life and it is real and it is true when it isn't any of those things. It's just a manufactured, induced state of mental addiction, effectively. The idea that the more I think about it, it's going to get more and become all that is, rather than just say, no, what's actually happening is the more I think about it, the more depressed I feel, the more hopeless I feel, the more reactive I get, the more impulsive I get, and the more compulsive I get as a result. It seems to have a very natural order to it all, as life would have. So good morning, Harry. So when Les gets back,
Good morning.
here he is. So anyway, going further in that direction in terms of the little bit of the history of our relationship, Les's and my relationship, and also Herb's, is that this "When God is Powerless" with a question mark came out this last week, and Les had read it and said, I have a lot of questions, and some of it sort of triggered me. And Herb does his best to look at things as objectively as possible, and also as inclusive as possible at the same time. He is not one to think slightly about things, and he is not one to be brash in his conclusions. He apparently, in these, I was just talking a little bit about this document and my history with Herb, Les, now that you're back. But Herb has said to me that when he sends these out, he does not send them until he sits with them and refines them and edits them and clarifies them and fixes them. And sometimes it can take months before he knows they're done. He doesn't just draft them and craft them and send them out quickly. So all of his things are on YouTube now. During COVID, he put his whole year-long 12-step program with all of the information, along with the book that he wrote and published about the 12 steps and looking at them fully in all aspects. That is all now online on YouTube, et cetera. So anybody can do that from home, from wherever they are, and listen in rather than we used to all, go to a room with 80 people in it and sit through for an hour and a half a week, and which is also very valuable. But the fact that the expanse of this experience can be had by anyone, anywhere, with a little bit of technology is a profound step in the direction of inclusion and opportunity. So anyway, Les, you were talking about, and Gabe, welcome. We're talking a little bit about this document that Herb K sent out this last week, and Les wanted to focus on a couple of items, I believe, a couple of the issues.
Yeah. Sorry if my internet connection, maybe like my thoughts are intermittent. But I was saying that and I don't know how far you guys heard, but my growing up and developing an understanding, a belief in God or higher power often started from a individual figure that was, maybe have looked human, would have developed out, but basically was a being. And over time, that has evolved into this wonderful symmetry, connectivity, functionality of existence.
Another freeze. Maybe we could call this brain freeze.
Les, if you take your video off, you might get better connectivity.
Les, James suggested turning your video off using sound.
Okay, I'll give that a shot. I just think that I really think we're having a provider information here, but I will do that in 1 second. So
yeah.
Hopefully this helps.
It helps me enormously.
Oh, yes. Reconsider. And then in looking at your discussions and even a lot of the way that Herb describes reality in that writing, and it almost, I don't want to say it comes into conflict, but it tries to re-describe the fundamental nature of how everything works and doesn't work and is okay. And part of it is this concept that, it's not necessarily a being. And I'm going to go to my cell phone. Go ahead and carry on. Maybe through data, I won't have this issue. I apologize.
Okay. We'll stand by. So I don't know exactly what it is he's focusing on in that, but I know that the concept of God for many of us, in my experience, if I make believe I am the creator of reality because I think my thinking itself becomes myself, then the God I'm generally worshiping is ego and or other components of a human-made God. And in sobriety, we're all asked to have a God of our own understanding, but it's always qualified with a willingness to grow along spiritual lines, because any understanding I have about it has got to be limited in terms of my thinking. If all I'm thinking about is this power is how I can define it, I end up thinking that that power is the real power rather than see that once again it's a self-centered idea about God, because any God that is absolute would not have limits or be thought of, and would not need to be thought of to be all those other things that we might talk about in this conversation: absolute, unlimited, omnipotent, omniscient, all present, all powerful, etc. Those things are not conditions of thought. Thoughts are conditions of a process of limited ideas in relation to things. So to see it from a, looks like Les is back again. At some point, Les will be more today.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb. Can you hear us, Les?
I think I'm connecting through my iPhone now. I don't know. I'm technologically challenged. So if I'll just carry on with this until you can hear me.
We hear you.
So, well, first of all, I guess it starts from the place where I absolutely want to have a acceptance that there is a either higher power or God or whatever, and that I am not the be all center of existence. That allows me and helps me to become part of as compared to apart from. So hang on, I think of course now I'm getting feedback. Okay, I'm just going to carry on. So I guess it just furthers the discussion of the concept.
Les, I
Yes.
have a feeling that your computer is still on and we're getting feedback.
All right, let me try to shift to iPhone and see if that works. Let me shut this off. Hold on one second.
I would turn the computer off if you're using the phone. Technology is such a boon. You know, it's kind of amazing it works at all. But today we're witnessing it slightly dysfunctioning. But I don't think it's any different than the dysfunction of the thinking I do. And as Les was pointing out, that it may be sort of metaphoric for the thinking he does, that is incomplete and or relied on as though it's true, and creates this inner feedback, literally like an echo chamber of voices trying to sort out all this information inside my head as though those voices are independent of me.
Does this work? Am I back on now through the phone?
Yeah, that's perfect. And there's no feedback.
No, I got feedback. I heard what you said. Well, but that's. I started this out by saying, Jack, I felt like I was disturbed a bit after reading this.
Yeah.
And what all that does is that, and it's like what a lot of the steps say. When I'm disturbed, it doesn't mean something's right or wrong. It means that something's not making sense, or something doesn't sit well, or something isn't compatible with either my spirit.
We're losing you again, Les. So to carry on from his point, it won't be necessarily the point he was trying to make, but the idea that we're disturbed, he's talking about being incompatible and something's wrong. He's saying it's not wrong, but I would say that the disturbance is actually an awareness of something that isn't aligned, something that is dysfunctional. And James and I had a conversation earlier today, and if our bodies are a product of nature, and our bodies include a brain, which would also be a product of nature, then the inherent nature of nature would be our nature. And to think of our nature as only what we think of it would be to malign our thoughts in relation to that absolute knowing nature that would be our nature.
What was this communication Herb K sent out? Can you forward that, or is that something that you can talk about?
I'll do it later, but I was going to let Les deal with that. But I'm piggybacking on the point that he was making about the disturbance. And it's pretty much what you and I talked about before, James called this morning at 8:30 and we had a little conversation. If the nature of our nature is natural, and I am reading the body language as something that shouldn't be happening, I am confirming that I don't think what I'm thinking I should be thinking either. I'm choosing to put myself at odds with my experience. Les is back, but I'm going to continue this point that I started, Les. I don't know if you heard me at all, but the book says, I think in the 6th step in the 12 and 12, that whenever I am disturbed, something, and it inserts in there, which is seldom used, no matter the cause, something is wrong with me. What's wrong is my thinking about what's happening. That's the disturbance. And when, James, I think you said earlier, or maybe you said it, Les, I don't always know what's going on in terms of the disturbance. It doesn't matter why, it matters that. If we're disturbed, that's the start point. If I'm disturbed and say I'm disturbed, I'm aligning now my thinking with what's happening. And what's happening is a greater sense of knowing, because my body is sensing things well beyond what I'm thinking, because it's managing all kinds of data, thousands, maybe millions, maybe billions of bits of information that I'm not paying attention to at all for the most part until something goes wrong. So Les, I want you to continue at this point and hope that we can get to a point.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, and much better.
Okay. So
it may be the sweatshirt though that's causing all the.
Well, I guess I'll just have to change. And it's a shame, because I felt this is a really insightful, helpful, useful topic and useful tool, and you were describing it, because it's so easy. It's so easy to get set not only in my ways, in my thoughts, in my beliefs, which is why we say we shouldn't be judgmental. That's so easy that when certain foundations, such as one's understanding of God or a higher power, is I don't want to say attacked, but is challenged in something that may make sense or not, that it's like, whoa. And I'm trying to chalk it up to two components. One, we talked about this disturbance. It was just, maybe it's my inner alignment that my previous depth of belief or understanding wasn't either broad enough or correct. And then on the other hand, I need to have the willingness to always be able to grow and expand my understanding, recognizing that as far as my thinking, my quote, thought, brain, body understanding is limited when looking at that which is all, everything, ever present, and now. And so I have to try to align with my intuitive understanding. And after looking at what Herb put up there, it didn't so much change my understanding. It just meant that I need to sense a little deeper, because there's a lot in there that makes sense, and there's some of it that doesn't align. And that's the value of discussion. But the important thing for me was not that, no, there is no God, and not know that it's a certain way, whatever. I didn't particularly like the last component of what he said, in that God is powerless. For some reason, even if that means that we have free will and we can do what we want, how we want, even if it's not congruous with nature, reality, or survival, or I shouldn't say survival, or goes beyond just the natural survival instinct. I was a little bit, I didn't like that concept that, quote, God didn't have power over it. And if that may well be true, because we have free will, but it also kind of ran contrary to my preconceived thoughts that there is a force in the universe that can correct anything that's out of alignment, including me. So that was a
So
little bit disturbing.
let me make a point about your point. What it says is, and if I'm thinking reactive thoughts, if I'm thinking obsessively, what I read, I'm going to read as what I think it says rather than what it says. And when I listen to people, I'm going to hear what they say is what I think they're saying rather than what they're saying. And if I see things, I'm going to see them as what I think is happening rather than what's actually happening. So the distinction is, I think when I'm seeing it reactively, it's what they're doing that's causing my experience rather than what I'm doing about what they're doing. And it's what I think I'm seeing that's causing my problem in my experience rather than how I'm thinking about what I'm seeing. So when you say it's hard to define it, it's not hard to define it at all. We have been just used to being in this complexity we've created and pretend that there's no way out. So we keep dramatizing these ideas that aren't true about the fact that it's easy to be stuck. It isn't easy to be stuck. It's a hellacious experience that's misery incarnate and depressing and diminishing and decapitating and diminishing our capacity enormously to even function on a level that we would not only be surviving but thriving as a species. So it seems easy because we get stuck so quickly, and to come from the stuck ideas about that stuckness, it's easy to think that stuckness is easy when in fact it's hard. But the easiness of simplicity is that it never changes. An absolute source never changes, it never comes and goes. And my reading of this, if I'm reading it correctly, it may not be aligned with what Herb's saying, but I'm aligning it with what my perception is at this point, is he's saying God is powerless to be not God. Because he's describing an absolute, think of what he says up there, fully present, infinite, always fully present, 100% as it is. It is equivalent to all reality by its very nature. And he says down there, God reality represented by this symbol, the symbol of a word that we use, which is not God. It's a word that we use. Even in the Hebrew tradition, they created a word to reference the word because they thought it was sacrilegious to refer to God as something other than all that God can be, and recognize that a word itself was a limiting feature. So that God as a word isn't God, it's a reference to. And words, by virtue of that principled idea, are in fact just references. They don't need to be sorted out to get the spirit of what is being said. If anyone willing to look at the sum total of everything, rather than the divisive nature of making believe that each word needs to be ordered in an alignment that we all agree to before it's something to be worthy of valuing or relying on. So my experience is he's saying here, he's giving us this infinite, absolute, 100% as it is, always equivalent to all reality, and even equivalency at that point, because you're now dealing with an infinite source. There is no equal sign in it because there's no mathematics to it. There's no dimension to it. It's really a realm that's hard to even describe and talk about, but we can talk about it by noticing that it will not change when we think about it differently. That it stays the same, it's a constant, it's an absolute nature, and not he's saying, and what I'm reading is power. This symbol, God, the reality represented by this symbol, not the symbol as reality, not the words, not my understanding as reality, but the absolute nature of this absolute being, this absolute state of whatever it is powerless to be not God. It doesn't have any power to be not God because it wouldn't be all powerful if it had that power. Power of that sort of not having is in choice. That's in what brains can do. That's in what I can do, what you can do. We can choose to think we're not thinking what we're thinking. Choice, I would not say in an all-knowing sense, is possible within that all-knowing sense, because what there would there be to choose? It's already all known. It's already all that is. You wouldn't have anything to choose because there wouldn't be no distinction. If you chose any of it, you'd be choosing all of it. And if you chose all of it, you'd be choosing everything in it simultaneously, if there is anything. My sense is in that realm, there's no things whatsoever. So nothing becomes profoundly different in a concept than having no things and thinking by having no thing, you have nothing, when in fact, nothing becomes the space for everything within the context of our experience. If there weren't space, there'd be no room for anything. So he's saying its necessity is unconditional, creative, and love. Unconditional means there's no conditions whatsoever. Any of the bounds I place on it, any of the ideas I have on it would be disturbing ideas if I think they're true in relation to truth and reality, because truth and reality doesn't get diminished or reduced or eliminated by my thinking. My experience of it becomes dramatically impacted by the mentality I choose to utilize in relation to it. That's the disturbance. We're disturbed because what we're doing, it's like putting a pebble in a lake. Perfectly calm lake, you throw the pebble in, it's going to affect everything on that water as far as that ripple goes. Those disturbances are noticeable to us as a guidance system to whether we're thinking in terms that are right or thinking in terms that are wrong. And I would not diminish right and wrong in this case, because our instinct to survive is based on making right decisions. Our instinct is not based on making absolute insane decisions to do the thing we think we can't do anything otherwise when that thing is killing us, which is what addictions are, compulsions. Compulsions are never attached to anything healthy because they're coming from unhealthy thoughts. What's unhealthy? What's unnatural? What's immoral? What's not innate? It's an option to choose those thoughts. We're free to choose those thoughts, but it doesn't make them real. It doesn't make them everything we can possibly do. It just makes them something we're doing. And if the consequence of those things, the effect of those things is disturbing, noticing the disturbance is in fact an awareness that we have of what we're thinking rather than who we are, because we're not our thoughts, we're having thoughts, is easy to change the thought because we cannot think of that thought anymore. The ultimate freedom of free will is not choosing anything, including things that can't be chosen, because things that are insane are only, and they don't even exist, they just are thought to exist. They're not real choices, they're induced choices, so they have no applicable purpose other than to diminish our capacity and create enough pain for us to finally realize we're doing something that has no basis in reality. So that presence, we know, we're aware of it. We're aware of it to know what's wrong so clearly, and not always in our own experience, but to see everyone else is wrong so clearly is an indication that we absolutely have a sense of right. It doesn't mean that our seeing in them the wrong that they're doing isn't an avoidance mechanism to deny the wrong we're doing, because I would say that's exactly what it is. We seem to be really clear about what's wrong in the world, but don't always have great clarity in the wrong we're doing about the thinking we're doing about the world. And yet that distance is telling us, each of us, it's giving us a chance, like a dashboard, to say your oil's low, the light's flashing, you can keep driving, but it's going to be catastrophic if you continue. So my sense is that he's saying if God has no powerless to be not God, he's referring to the fact that there are no choices in absolute knowing, in omniscience, in all power, in omnipotence, in omnipresence. There's no choices because there's no time. There's no options. And yet what's interesting about that, within the realm of thinking, if I had no options, like in addiction, the idea that I have no other option is what I use to justify continuing to do the same thing. I think if I say I have no other option, I'm admitting I have no control, or I'm demanding I have no control. And so I think doing the same thing over and over again is the only thing I can do. In fact, in an absolute state of knowing, there are no choices because there's nothing to choose. There's no bits and pieces. It's a source of knowing that knows, it knows, it knows, it knows in absolute terms. And I would suggest that is our knowing present now. You and I, them and there, everyone, everywhere now simultaneously share that. So if there's any remedy, it doesn't come in straightening out a past that doesn't exist or a future that may not come. Because when the past was past, it was present. And when the future comes, it's present. So if we're dealing in the present and it's all that ever is, it might as well be the place we start noticing it and start dealing with the issues that we're creating now about the things we thought happened then or might happen in the future. And that remedy eliminates the trauma of making believe we're not where we belong, we have no place, and all those things. We're feeling our thinking. We're not feeling our actual place in space and time or the realm of an absolute state. We're feeling our thoughts. And if our thoughts have no substance, and I think they have substance, if I think a thought that's a lie is true, I'm literally using substance abuse by making believe the substance in a mental state is going to come true because I think it should, or I think it would, or I think it is. And what's interesting is, while that substance is very different than the chemical substance, that unleashes chemicals in our system for emergencies used for survival instinct because our body knows something is seriously wrong. And we end up depleting our ability to function. Our bodily systems begin to dysfunction, making us susceptible to diseases that would not otherwise occur in a healthy, healing, prone body. So we're literally using chemical abuse within our own system. We don't have to be ingesting it to be creating it in the mental factory we have that's operating our bodily systems. Is there anything else in there, Les, that I will make this part of next week's announcement too, for everybody. And you can also go to his website, herbk.com, I think it is, and just get on his mailing list. He sends generally one of these out a week of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Hi, am I muted still, Jack, or am I off now? Sorry, I'm just.
No, you're on.
So you just said something that when we have our thinking and it's misaligned and we believe that the lie is the truth and reality, we
Yes.
then can think that there's no other option. There's no choices
Right.
other than to whatever, do drugs, alcohol, or unhealthy behavior, or whatever, self-destructive behavior. Then you also said before that it's when you were describing what Herb was trying to say regarding powerless, and is that in a perfectly aligned universe or existence or reality, whatever, there are no choices. And therefore, it's like basically saying God does not make choices. And therefore, that there's no option in looking at the spiritual cohesion, then how is it? I guess it just goes back to free will. That's, I guess what he's trying to say is, since there's no options in spiritual cohesion, then the only way that we are disturbed is by us using our free will to our detriment and not being aligned.
Beautiful. So if we are free in our will and choose to create the sense of condemnation, not belonging and disconnection and aloneness, that's how free love actually is. People say, well, why would God allow us to do this? Well, we would have to be condemned to not being able to do things that we're perfectly capable of doing, because an absolute loving source would allow us to do anything that's possible. And that includes making believe that the impossible is possible. Here's a very interesting point to this, Don, Les, and I don't know that we've ever really crossed this, because I don't think we've taken the conversation this far. But we have, but I don't think it's been as clear as I think it can be right now. In the absolute sense, addiction is trying to be that absolute sense by claiming to be all that is. So we're using condemnation as a source of claiming to be absolute by claiming to think of God only in terms that we think of God. So the God we're thinking of is not God at all. It's a name we're using to define the absolute nature of self-centeredness and the idea of narcissism and the sociopathic idea of addiction. Addiction then becomes, I have no other choice. It's trying to mirror the absolute within the confines of the relative. And that's the insanity of what we use the word ego for today, which is false self. All that I have is a God that I seem to make up that has, not ironically, but very consequentially, very human characteristics. Tends to be a man, tends to never be here, always somewhere else, tends to have the power to destroy me, tends to be vindictive, hateful, and send me to hell if I don't behave. Those are all social issues caused by humans. This isn't a loving absolute nature that we're talking about at all. It is a God created in the image and likeness of humans, of this insane thinking about God. So God doesn't have to be a God of any understanding whatsoever. And I would say the reason we're asked to have a God of our own understanding is because it allows us to begin to peek beyond, to begin to imagine beyond the limits of our thoughts as something else we could even think about. And by doing that, a whole seemingly universe opens up to us that's always been there beyond those limits, but we didn't think it was, so we thought it wasn't there. And in that same way, we think it's easy to fall prey to these dysfunctional, addictive mental tendencies, but it's very, very difficult because it fractures our capacity to function in all respects, in all ways, as a human being human. So addiction is trying to be absolute in offering. What's interesting, Les, think of this. Addiction says, I don't have anything to do. I'm subject to the addictive tendency of the drug, heroin, for instance. I can't stop drinking. I can't stop smoking pot. I'm in an addictive state. If the addictive state is mental primarily, which I would suggest it is, what I am in is a loop thinking I'm creating reality. And now I immediately think I am now created by that thinking. Who I am is that thinking. So I become my thoughts. Well, if I become my thoughts, I don't have any perspective left over because now I'm stuck in my thoughts. I'm not the observer of those thoughts. I'm stuck in those thoughts. And to be stuck in it is to think there's nothing else to do. So the second step in that unholy alliance, second step is I have nothing to do with this. I'm irresponsible. First thought was irresponsible. Second thought's going to be irresponsible. What's the second thought? I can't do anything about it. It's my only choice. It's my only option. What's the third step? Continue to do the same thing over and over and over again, thinking somehow it's the only thing I can do. But also with the hope and promise that one day it'll pay off. One day, just never today. One time, just never now. It's going to pay off. And you know what? There is time other than the present. And I would suggest there is no time in the present in an infinitesimal way. Time, as I would define it, the reason it flies when we're having fun and seems to slow down when we're depressed is because it's relative to my resistance. I'm creating an experience of time so that I can keep things held in the past as secrets and worry about things in a present that never comes or future that never comes to make believe that I'm a victim to it all. I have no control over it when I'm the one causing that whole experience. The universe did not, the wrinkles in time in the universe are not going to a plastic surgeon to fix the age, the wearing of age. When scientists look into the past, they are always looking from the present, always. To miss those points is to miss the essence of that presence is our current experience. And it's being misinterpreted and mislabeled and mistaken. And mistakes come with misgivings. Because we're taking things wrong, all we have to give is wrong. And that's unforgivable, because if we're taking things that are insane as reality, we actually have nothing whatsoever to give. So we become unforgiving of others and make believe it's them. Again, repeating this whole cycle of victimization. So if there's no choice, it means all that's possible is always possible right now. And that means there is no limit to the possibility of my choices. That's the freedom. But the ultimate freedom, I started to get to this point earlier, the ultimate freedom is not to be able to choose things that are impossible, meaning I want to be moon and I'm on the moon right now. I can get there if I do the things it takes to get there, but it's probably not going to happen immediately. It's going to take an effort of present moments that are aligned with life's terms. And when I get there, it will be the present. It won't be some time past. It'll be the just as it always is. But the ultimate freedom of choice is recognizing that we have no obligation to choose anything ever. If we choose not to breathe, we will probably pass out and keep breathing. Nature will take over for us and take care of us. We choose not to eat, very hard way to die. Most people end up eating. Hunger strikes don't last that long. We can obstruct nature by our choices, and addiction is the attempt to pretend it is nature and it is reality, so that there is no other nature or reality. And if there's an absolute nature and reality, it never changes regardless of what we think. Our thinking is irrelevant to it. Our acceptance of it is irrelevant. While it may help us begin to notice that we're absolutely aligned with it and always have been, it also creates the impression that we're responsible for it coming and going when it ever left and ever gone and can't be any more or less than it always is presently. For each and every one and each and everything and each and everything between the things that we don't think are things, that would be absolutely true in every respect. So it takes a significant load off. I don't have to do anything at all to be connected to everything. And when I start thinking in absolute terms, the intuitive nature of my knowing essence begins to inform my thinking, because I'm not disforming and perverting the perversion of the story I'm telling to rationalize and justify what I'm doing will someday be okay, while it's never seeming to be okay now. The fact is, whatever's happening is always happening in the present as it's happening. And to come to terms with this is to start to concede that the only place I ever am is now and here. And it's really not a place in that essential realm. It isn't a place at all. It isn't a time at all. It's an absolute state of inspiration and wisdom and intuition. So intuition is knowledge beyond reason, not within reason, understanding, and thought. So to begin to contemplate that as our state, regardless of what we thought, for as long as we held the thoughts that weren't true, it didn't make those thoughts true, even though it seemed to be in our memory, our reality. That's just another contrivance of trying to make believe that somehow or some point we'll be the masters of the universe. It's exactly what false ego is about. It's what egomania is about. It's what dictators are about. It's what's happening on this planet when it comes to, and has been, when it comes to individuals who think they are God, and as a result have the right to oppress and suppress and kill their own people that they seem to be in charge of because of what they think. And it's largely all that it comes down to. People have been sentenced this past week for what they thought about a social situation somewhere in the country. It's happening all the time. Everywhere there's some of this going on, almost all the time, if not all the time. We've built civilization on uncivilized idea and wonder why it's so uncivil. And think we're better by keeping from it and thinking it's not happening. And I guarantee you it is happening as it's happening right now, because of our denial and our defense and our defiance and the delusion that somehow we're better because we're not witnessing the worst of it. There are people that are witnessing it. And if we were those people, we would certainly want others to recognize it. And we are, in fact, those people because we are bystanders of all that when we're standing by as though we have nothing to do with it. We become contributors and conspirators in the wrong direction by allowing it to happen by thinking we don't have anything to do with it. Think of that in relation to the addictive unholy alliance. I'm not responsible for it. There's nothing I can do about it. The only thing I can do is continue doing it. It's the same thinking, exactly the same thinking. And it is sick and it is sad. And we know it. We know it. Or we wouldn't constantly be trying to feel better. And to think we don't know it is just another thought to try to defend against it and react against it and to claim we're better. And for me to be better only because I'm not as bad off as somebody else is a pretty sick method of comparison. Rather than see that we all have the same basis, we all have the same freedoms, we all have the same choices, and we are certainly acting on that premise collectively on a very healthy basis. It's nothing I can tell anyone to do. It's something each one is deciding for themselves to do right now. And to notice that is to begin to notice we're each responsible 100% for the responsibility we've been given, the body we have, the brain we have, the thoughts we have, and the feelings we have. Interesting division here. In the element of an absolute nature that's infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, omniscient, all-powerful, even the word powerful, which Herb is kind of getting at in that, is that it isn't power to that power. It's just an essence of knowing. It's an essence of pure consciousness. It just is what it is, as it is, as it is, period. Just an essence that we know because it can't be not here. And simply because we think we don't know it doesn't mean we don't know it. But what's interesting in that absolute realm, which he points out, there's no choice because God can't unchoose God because there's no choice in that. It's just an absolute present state of being. It doesn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an end. It's a realm that when you consider will absolutely begin to take apart a lot of obsessive thoughts by simply contemplating on it when you're walking, driving, talking to other people, rather than thinking you need to sit silently in a meditative state in a quiet room that offers you an experience of quiet and peace when in fact your head is waiting to walk out of that room and go right back to work, creating the disruption and the antagonism and all the other conflicted thoughts that will come as a result of circumstances. But if there is no choice in a reality that is absolute, you can't be condemned by that lack of choice. I can't choose it right now. I can't choose to be with it. I can't choose to be without it. Because it's absolute pure consciousness and pure love and pure absolute, which is what the absolutes came from, that defined the steps. I can't unchoose it, and yet I can't be condemned by it. Here's the difference. Within thinking, I can't choose. Within thinking, I am condemned to the thinking I'm thinking. And that's addiction. And what's the condemnation? I become useless. I become dysfunctional. I become spiteful. I become contemptful. I feel alone, disconnected. All of the bedevilments and more. I think I can win the fight. I think it's only a fight. I think I'm better when other people are worse. The sickness of it becomes obvious in the intuition and awareness that we all have, which is very upsetting. And I would say it's present traumatic stress disorder because it's thinking out of order. Thinking is the primary source of our existence. And as a result, reality doesn't exist except for what we make of it. And that would be a very self-seeming centered model, but it isn't self-centered. We even talk about it improperly. It's thinking centered on thinking, as though that thinking of itself becomes ourself, and all I am now is what I think. And so all I think is real and true, and everybody else better get on the program, or I'm going to hate them and spite them. Well, it's the spite I have for the hateful things I'm thinking that I'm trying to divest having anything to do with and diminish the impact by casting them on everyone else, everyone and everything else. And that doesn't end when I stop drinking or doing drugs and I'm free from a symptom. The beginning of the potential to look at that clearly and honestly starts from not altering my experience with external chemicals to be able to notice the impact I'm having on the chemical system that I have called my body. Anxiety being one of the primary sources. Anxious disorders, nervous disorders, metabolic disorders, they're all describing bodily systems designed to help the body survive and function the body in healthy terms because they're designed to heal problems as they come along naturally. But if I diminish the capacity of my bodily systems by subjecting it to anxiety that's completely induced by my thinking, I am now the cause while denying the fact that I am the cause by thinking the effect of that, the demoralizing, depressing, disturbing, uneasy, discomforting conditions I'm experiencing are something to get over and feel better about by working out, running 30 miles, eating better, getting into a new relationship, buying any of those things I do to distract myself. I'm actually maintaining that problem by pretending it isn't there. While it grows, I need more and more and more of those other things to try to outstrip it and outrun it. But my tolerance level means that as I begin to tolerate it, I become numb to it. I don't think it's because now I'm numb to it. Numbness is actually an indication of something wrong, not the absence of something. I'm putting myself to sleep. And while the problem grows, I constantly need more and more and more of those other exterior things to try to attach to outrun this thing because it's constantly growing in the backdrop of my thinking. I'm not thinking what I'm thinking. So in one sense, I can't be condemned by having everything, because if there's no choice in an absolute nature, then I have everything wherever I am all the time. Everything everywhere is part of my experience right now, all of our experience. And it's not just mine and yours, it's all of ours and all that is and all that are. Pretty broad. That's pretty good. That's a gift. That's loving. That's caring, considerate. And yet within the thinking, trying to be absolute, since it's absolutely insane, I feel contemptful, hateful, spiteful. It isn't judging that we shouldn't be doing, because brains judge naturally. When we think that thought that we're having is reality, we immediately condemn anyone who doesn't think that way. And because we are condemned to the thinking we're doing in our own experience, we're imposing a sense of condemnation that now, because we don't want to be responsible, we're pretty sure everyone else and everywhere else and everything else is doing to us. And so how has that been through history? We have this original sin is part of the story that's been told. Intractable, something we constantly need to overcome. The desire within Buddhism, it isn't desire and attachment that Buddha said was wrong, or it isn't desire that he said was wrong, it's the attachment to it. And he was describing addiction, a cleanness, a stickiness to thoughts, or words that were used, still used. I don't know all of the religions. I don't bother to try to get the historical basis to all of this stuff because there's people that know all that a lot better than I'm going to spend my time learning. But I know that if the principle is unprincipled, that it is fractured into all kinds of states of thought that appear to be real and look real and seem real and could be real someday if we continue to think them. Unprincipled nature has no principle. It's always going to be something only held in the thoughts of humans. Lies only exist in the thoughts of humans. And the obsessiveness of it is that they need to be maintained to continue to seem to exist when they're never maintained long enough to actually exist. Any distraction, taking my attention off of that thing, has it dissolve And yet, if it's inherent in the thinking I'm doing, I'm going to try to find it somewhere to resurrect it, as though there's a resurrection possible to something that's never had any life itself. It's just another thought being imagined to be reality. So I don't talk about this because I don't do that. I talk about this because I do that. And I'd rather get better at talking about it with other people who talk about it, so we can look for the commonality between us in this relationship we have to our human experience and our absolute knowing basis. And in seeing that, we see there's no difference between any of us except for the circumstances and the situations and the faces and the places and the times that we assign the problem to. All that's happening is happening now. We're part of everything that's happening, and we cannot be apart from what we are part of. It's impossible. So in one respect, no freedom of choice allows us everything when we make that concession in real terms, because dealing with reality, and no option in thinking is to condemn us to a seeming reality that has no hope and no future, and no amount of faith or belief is ever going to turn it into anything but more conflicted consequences. If anyone listening would like a copy of Herb K's When God is Powerless, you can look it up online. You can text in the context of the whatever podcast you're listening to, and I'll email one to you to get you started. These can be very provocative because there are a lot of people who have spent a long time looking at these things and doing their best to honestly convey words that give a greater potential to both see the disturbance we may each be maintaining and or notice the limits of those disturbances and start to see the inspired natural wisdom in the intuition that we naturally have, and allow that to be our guide rather than the thinking about thinking always, and thinking more thinking is somehow going to save us. It just begins to notice it's always been with us. And we've been sad a long time. For as long as I've maintained the idea that I'm disconnected, I have felt alone and sad and a loss for the experience I'm having, because I've been dysfunctional and depreciated my capacity to function on a level that would be commensurate with value and worth. And so what do I feel? Worthless, less than. All of those things are natural consequences of the thinking that's disturbed. And it isn't from thinking it's disturbed, it's thinking that thinking is real that cements the problem. Because as soon as I do that, I make believe those thoughts I'm having are reality, and they are the only reality, and everybody better get lined up with me, or they're going to be toxic, and I don't want anything to do with them anymore. I create the aloneness I'm afraid of being alone having. It's crazy. It is nutty, and nuts are great in candy and in some personalities, but insanity is not healthy. And this is an induced form of insanity. And I would say that it's probably affected the genetic makeup of our bodies, because we've been subjecting our bodies to imagined reality, and our body hasn't known what to do with it. So allergies today are at an all-time high. Suicide's at an all-time high. Addiction is at an all-time high. There are tens of billions of dollars of cocaine being snorted on a regular basis by people who think they're having a great life. That goal does not come from thinking life is great. It comes from thinking life is very depressing and you need some chemical alteration to feel better about it. It's never going to be enough. Drinking, I would suspect today, is at an all-time high. And again, I'm not casting a shadow on it. If there isn't a shadow cast by anyone doing it thinking it's actually helping their life get better, you can do that. Perfectly free to do that. For some people, that may be perfectly right, fine, and all that. My sense is, to the degree that we're using it to feel better, we're denying this that we're creating that doesn't feel better. And it's probably worth looking at. as a species might be worth mentioning and talking about openly.
This discussion today reminds me of the early discussions you were having a couple of years ago, in the sense that when you were talking and when you're describing things and you just can go on and be articulate, and it takes a while for the listener to keep up with, understand, accept, as compared to having a normal conversation and discourse. So my reticence to either share was that I was really, this is helping my alignment by showing my misalignment and
Yeah.
in my thinking. When, of course, I was very comfortable before reading this, that I was comfortable with my thinking.
Well, and maybe, Les, what you were doing to offset the discomfort was giving you the impression of comfort, but it was also taking some of your energy and some of your attention that ended up being a distraction to all the rest of what's going on. And you might find yourself during the week wondering why you're not paying attention very well to what's happening. Because if we're doing it and don't think we're doing it, it's still having an impact on our experience. It's like thinking we're not lying when we're lying. We don't have to think we're lying to have the impact of a lie we're maintaining impact us. It's going to impact us. Just like we don't have to think a rock is falling on our head. Well, it's not going to change the consequence of the rock falling on our head. We can play ignorant by ignoring things, but in fact, we know better the whole time. And one of the main focus of this conversation is to begin to notice that this understanding is never going to be enough here until understanding is understood as not being enough. And that's the concession. And it doesn't come from me saying it. It comes from each individual starting to look at their own experience and saying, I've been trying this for years. Millions of times I've been off on this. I can feel it in my body that I'm doing the same thing, thinking it's going to be some magically different potion this time. And noticing that the awareness we have, that absolute awareness, is something we've always known. So we're not trying to understand it, but to know we know it. And if you can, within understanding, concede that you know it, you'll start to clarify the misunderstanding that you've been thinking was understanding, which has been causing the disturbance. It's two things come out of this that are very interesting. When I think a lie is true, I now think that my understanding, that misunderstanding has now become understanding, and misperception is now perception. I talk about it in terms to make it seem real, when in fact the terms I use are completely backward. The other aspect of it is that when I feel wrong, I'm actually feeling a thought rather than reality as being wrong, rather than I am being wrong. I am feeling something that I am choosing to think is wrong. And now the mechanics of recognizing I have no obligation to continue choosing that thought become clearer, like you just said. As my understanding begins to actually understand what's happening, the solution isn't in what I say, it's in what you're willing to be aware of. And we have not lacked faith or willingness or hope at all. We've had enormous amount of faith in faithless things. We've had enormous amount of hope in hopeless things. We've had enormous amount of trust in untrustworthy things, things that have no basis. So it isn't that we've been struggling with those things, it's that we've been struggling with those things to be enough in an environment where enough will never be enough. And those are excellent words that define addiction. It takes very little faith to notice that truth is true. And I would suggest it takes none whatsoever, because if it's always an absolute state of being that isn't chosen, It doesn't come and go. It isn't more or less. It isn't only there when I think it's there. It's there when I'm absolutely positive it isn't there. Now my misunderstanding becomes clear, and I can start to see that I've been thinking that my misunderstanding is my understanding. Within sobriety, they talk about addiction being a disease of perception. And I would say it's actually a disease of misperception, being perceived as perception in this same sort of fractured state. If you look at it honestly, you start to take it apart a little bit, makes a little more sense to the understanding, because the understanding hasn't made any sense at all because it's been misunderstanding that we've been understanding. And that can seem hard to grasp, but I guarantee you haven't grasped it till this point. You're not going to, except to see that it's just a fantasy, wishful thinking on parade, making believe that somehow the charade of the parade is going to turn into reality, when all it does is create manifest effects that are disturbing and difficult to live with. And certainly as a result to concede, because the worse things get, if we can't right now notice that we're doing what we're doing that's causing the impact we're having in our own experience, there's no chance doing more of that is going to feel a little more likely to want to concede. We're embarrassed. And I would say that's one of the natural byproducts of this guilt and shame that we are actually guilty, ashamed of for operating on this basis. We know better, or we wouldn't feel those things. Nobody's ever come to me and said, I feel exhilarated and I'd like to stop. And I'm having way too many positive thoughts that are working successfully, and I really need to demolish that train of thinking. It's always the opposite. Why? Because this underlying issue has not been dealt with openly and honestly. I'm not saying it hasn't at all, but it hasn't been openly and honestly discussed broadly enough to be a social discussion that we're having today. We're doing things that are helping people get worse in the name of thinking we're getting better. Those are not coming from drug addicts and heroin addicts. Those are coming from highly intelligent people making policy decisions that are hurting and harming people. And I'm not saying Republican or Democrat or any party. I'm talking about humans functioning and dysfunctioning as a social component, as a community of humans, as a family of humans, based on the same nature. There's no division in that. Inspiration is wisdom, and intuition is inspiration. That's the holy trinity of mental capacity, I would say, in terms of reckoning with our potential to express this loving nature, which I suspect is what thoughts are designed to do. And the expression becomes a conduit. Our body becomes a conduit to this knowing nature that we can channel, meaning it's coming through us. It's actually being allowed to surface in the actions we take, in the thoughts we have, in the decisions we make, rather than making believe circumventing it, which isn't possible to begin with. That's the insanity of this. But circumventing it by thinking about our thinking about our thinking about our thinking, and thinking someday the thinking is going to be enough to make it all right, is actually stripping us of the experience that it's all right now. Always has been, always will be. Life's terms do not change because our terms change. Life does not change because we think it changes. Existence does not change because of our thoughts. We can manipulate experience. We can manipulate occurrences and circumstances and manifestations of those things. We can act deficiently and create scarcity rather than abundance. We're perfectly capable of doing that, but it has no impact whatsoever on reality, because all those possibilities of reality are still possible. And that's why, in my estimation, and to what Herb was talking about in relation to God, God isn't making my plan as though I have a plan. God has given me the freedom, and you the freedom, and us the freedom, if there is any infinite source, to make whatever choice we want. And it all comes with a guidance system that tells us when those choices are not aligned with reality. And there's nothing wrong with fantasy until we believe it is reality. That seems to be a cataclysmic occurrence for humans in terms of functional capacity. And in relation to that other idea I was posing earlier about understanding being misunderstanding, our functional capacity has become incapacity. We think deficiency is normal. We think excess and abundance is just some exceptional thing. Like we think healing is rare while disease is common. Those are all occurrences, social cultural developments that have become seemingly reality because they've been repeated, believed in, and relied on by enough people to make believe that because everybody else thinks that, it must be true. Well, if everybody else believes a lie, it's never going to be true.
Thanks for sharing that, Jack. I got a question. For the last hour or so, we've been talking all hypothetically. How would you deal with something that you're not happy about? Let's say somebody made you upset or something in your life is just not exactly what you want. And then you go into the mode of like, well, everything's wrong or this catastrophizing everything. How do you deal with that on an actual?
I don't try to answer questionable questions, Anthony. I'm not interested in trying to figure out how to further confuse the whole thing. If you think talk about reality is hypothetical, then I would say you think imagining reality is reality. And I would say that that basis of any question is going to be questionable. It's going to be unanswerable. Humans have been seeking and seeking and seeking and seeking and seeking in all the various forms and apparently have not resolved the questions yet. They're still seeking. That would tell me what they're seeking is probably what they have. Because what could be easier to miss than the thing you have that you don't think you have? What would be the place harder to find than the one you're in if you don't think you're there? And that's what we're talking about here, is beginning to concede our awareness rather than one more dive into the thinking and try to straighten it out. I've done that too much in this conversation, thinking somehow I would appeal with reason to what is unreasonable and irrational. And that just means I've gotten insane trying to make believe that insanity can be talked out of someone rather than have them. If we create it, we manifest it, we're the ones that can undo it. I can't undo it for you because you have the freedom to do it. And that's the freedom we each have. We each have the freedom of choice. We get to choose the consequences we're facing. And I would suggest if we're doing what we're doing, we want to be doing what we're doing. We want the consequences we're getting because ultimately we want to be right. And it isn't in the right in the thinking we're trying to be, it's trying to be the right in the knowing, the rightness of not righteousness that is imposed on people, but a rightness of knowing we're right because we're aligned. And if we are that this whole time, it's been insane to think that we're not. So appealing to questionable thoughts, I would say, when you think they're hypothetical, you're basing that thinking that all the reality is are circumstances. And I would say that's just a byproduct of thought.
Anthony, I would describe your question maybe another way. If you come across someone and the interaction doesn't make you feel good, or you're disturbed, or they bother you, or whatever, the question that, or the sensation that one should have, and this when we talk about these feelings, is this alignment. Am I feeling misaligned because, or disturbed because of my belief system through thought? Or am I being disturbed because what I see around me or what they're saying or doing is against my intuitive nature?
Well,
And
it would
I
be
find
their
that more
nature
often
too.
than not that it's often but I'm not willing to make the time because, most of the time, I like to make snap judgments. I'm right, you're wrong, whatever, or that doesn't make sense. And I don't take the time like we've done here to really explore the depth of why I feel a certain way. My feelings just come instantaneously, just like my thoughts sometimes. And of course, I'm going to accept those feelings, except when I don't like them. And when I don't like them, all I want to do is get rid of them, not so much determine whether or not it's because someone else was right or wrong, or because I'm right or wrong, but I just don't want to have them.
Just
Same
the
reason.
clarity, Les,
Yes.
that your feelings come immediately with your thought. Cause and effect are simultaneous, but cause always precedes effect. But the effect is simultaneous with the cause. Thinking and feelings are simultaneous. It isn't some lost cause we're seeking. It's the absolute cause of our current manifestation that we're struggling with by making believe it's true. To think of it as something we're struggling with is to think that it exists. And all it is an illusion. If we think of it as an illusion and an image, that isn't a big deal because we can stop imagining and stop alluding. It's seeing it
Well,
correctly.
that sounds easy, Jack, but I don't know that may be in a perfect sense, but I don't think that's the way virtually all humans think.
Well, addictively, you're absolutely right, because we make believe this other thinking is reality. To Anthony's question, given that it's each of our choice to continue to maintain the ideas we maintain that aren't true as truth, each of us do that. I don't do it for you. You don't do it for me. I can blame you for it, and I can think it's you doing it, but until I have clarity in my own doing, I don't see anything you're doing clearly at all, because I'm seeing it through a lens of misunderstanding. And so what am I going to do? Misunderstand what you're doing. To the degree that we make believe it's complicated is the degree that we're committed to trying to do impossible things that aren't life. Life isn't complicated. It's absolutely doing everything it's doing right now. And if you think that's complicated, where's the complication? The complication is we think we need to understand it. And the understanding of it is complicated but if you concede that it already knows what it knows and is doing what it's doing, that's not complicated at all. We've been complicating it to, again, think it's responsible for the complication rather than the thinking we're doing, when we can absolutely think of it in the most simple, absolute terms right now and eliminate any of that further complication by beginning to live with it as it is rather than as we make believe it is. But I know that's popular to do. The idea that it's complicated. I know that's very popular. Insanity is contagious.
What if you have what if you're not happy about a thought or something that's going on? Is it good to just dwell on it and really think about it all the time and try to figure out a solution?
What would you say, Anthony, given what you've heard in the last years of this conversation?
I think the word dwell really ruined the whole thing there, Anthony.
Yeah, you think you're at home.
If I'm having a thought which doesn't make me feel good, so it's really not the thought, it's the feeling. It's because the thought doesn't disturb me, it's the feeling I get from the thought.
Good point.
No.
And so okay, cause and effect, but my sense,
it's the thought.
Okay, so mental obsession, it's the thought.
If you're burning, is it the feeling of being burned or the fire that's causing it?
The point is to try to answer or to explore how to move forward, resolve, or not be stuck, or whatever, on having stinking thinking or thoughts that cause disturbance. Dwelling is just to me an admission that I'm just stuck with it and I'm going to dwell and wallow in it. And the question is, what kind of mechanisms do we have spiritually, intellectually, or otherwise to accept those thoughts, get outside the thought, like you say, Jack, and because the thoughts are not reality, and find a way to release them, let them go, or know that they don't have any power.
You realize that you're not in them. You've never been in them. You just thought you were in them.
Oh, but
And
some of us like being in our thoughts, right, Anthony?
yeah, I mean, everybody thinks they love it, but compulsions are exactly the same thing. We love killing ourselves is effectively what we're saying.
And
That's a sick use of thinking. But Les, let me make another point too. The nature of addiction is trying to figure out how to stop it while ignoring this restarting of it. What's the problem in alcohol? It's not the third drink, the second drink, the 10th drink, it's the first drink. If we're willing to say it's the feeling that I'm struggling with, we're denying it's the thought that's causing the feeling. If cause and effect work, you can't have an effect. We're turning the effect into the cause, and it's why addiction seems so impossible socially. We're constantly trying to figure out how to stop it rather than notice we're the ones constantly restarting it and making believe we have nothing to do with that. That's the problem. So if we're doing that here in our conversation, we're actually looking for ways to make sense of insanity. And that wouldn't be the heart of this conversation at all. So to think we're stuck in thoughts is a function of thinking, not reality. The observatory capacity we have to witness what's happening is not stuck in thoughts. Thoughts are still something happening, something we're doing, not something we are. It's the thinking were those thoughts that we're stuck in. If you're going to think you're stuck in them and now I have to figure out how to get out of them, you're just reinforcing the idea you're stuck. You're not. There's no stuckness in an illusion thought of as reality until you make believe further and further and further you need to do something about it. You're giving it a sense of reality. You're creating that sense by maintaining it. You're not diluting it at all. You're delusionally making believe you're somehow going to fix it. We've never been in our thoughts, and our thoughts can't be sicky, but we can think they are. We've never been disconnected, but we can think we are. We've never lied, but we can think lies are truth. We've never created reality,
yeah.
but we can think lies are truth. We do all those things because we're free to do those things. Does that make that the best thing we can do? Probably not. I think we have enough proof of that, but we don't seem to appreciate the proof.
My question is more of like, let's say something's bothering me. I like to dig into like, well, why is it really bothering? Is it me? That's where I go into. What part is mine,
Yeah,
where's
because
that?
you think it's not you. What part is mine so I can figure out who to blame?
Yeah.
I tell you, Anthony, 100% of responsibility is 100% of responsibility.
Yeah.
If we are each free to think what we think, 100% of that thinking is our responsibility. 100%. If you start there, you will stop looking elsewhere. And if you stop looking elsewhere, you'll notice the feelings you're having. And to your point, Les, if you feel bad, you're feeling a bad thought. That's all you need to know. You don't need to assign it to all of the details and all of the stories and all of the complicated things we do. We're the complicators. Reality isn't complicated because reality is real. That's the beginning and end of it all. Because there was no beginning or end to it. And it isn't now. It's an absolute present state of being. If you're feeling what you're feeling and seeing, it's a mirror image. If you're standing in the mirror and don't like what you're seeing, that's exactly what you're doing in your thinking. Feelings are a reflection of thought. If I feel wrong, I know I'm thinking something that's wrong. That's as far as I need to take it because it's immediate, it's reliable, and it's dependable, and it's honest right now. And I will guarantee you, those thoughts and that seeking you're doing to try to figure it all out and think about it. You're dwelling on something. Think about dwelling, aside from the idea of focusing on it, is your home. You become at home dwelling on stuff that's annoying the hell out of you and disturbing you. You think you're at home. That's your home. That's your place, the only place you can be. That's my home. That's just a conflicted state of being. That's not true. These things we express only occur in brains. If our brain wasn't working, we wouldn't be doing it. If we were in a coma, we wouldn't be suffering the consequences of it at all. Our awareness.
Isn't that why
feeling,
people often do things to be oblivious, to not think? They literally
exactly.
But I guess going back to my question,
but that's exactly what denial is psychic anesthesia. I'm not doing what I'm doing, and I feel better for a moment because I live in the fantasy that I'm not doing it. And yet the building crescendo of doom becomes clearer and clearer and clearer the longer I go, because I'm trying to get over the threshold of the numbness, the tolerance I've created, that I've been putting up with this stuff over and over and over and over and over again. Anthony, you've asked the same question in here for 3 years.
Well, my question is too, where does a little bit of
Here we go.
self-retrospect go? Like a little bit of self retrospect, looking at yourself is good. But where does it become like, okay, now you're past that and you've been spending way too much time trying to figure out
You
why
think
you're
that self is real. It's thinking about thinking itself that you've made believe is yourself. I would say that is more delusion of the exact same idea that we're talking about debunking here. There is no self that isn't thinking. It's thinking about thinking itself that is our contemplative advantage.
So you're saying it's okay to think about things, just don't think about it as it's you yourself. So
When you think thinking's reality, you think anything you think defines you.
Yeah.
It becomes you. Now you're in the thought.
that's why I
You're
like to
not
get
the
to the bottom
observer.
of it. That's it. Let's get to the
Exactly.
bottom.
You know what the bottom is? A grave. And grave situations and the gravity of the situation are defining all those things. We're killing ourselves.
Part of my problem is not being able to say no to some people. I realize I've been doing it and it's a powerful thing. And it's very, just little stuff like that. Like, well,
Why would you say no to others when you refuse to say, no, I'm not going to continue doing this kind of thinking?
Or if somebody doesn't do it the way I wanted it, like they didn't, I just sit there and analyze, like, what could I have done differently? Why did are other people?
Yeah, because you really think they're fooling with your reality.
Yeah.
They're not. They're not. You think that so you can blame them, so you can take the focus off of what you're doing. Anthony, you believe your thoughts are real. And you can say you don't believe that and lie again about that.
Well, I don't know if I say I don't believe it. I think I do believe my thoughts are real.
I know, but I would suggest to you that to the degree that you're thinking other people's thoughts are so critical to your reliance, you still think this is exactly the point I make about thinking about things. Thinking we're not thinking things we're thinking, the seeming subconscious. If we begin to notice that's where the real problem lies, not in the things we think we're doing, because we can say, oh, I'm not thinking that anymore. People say that to me all the time. And then they go right into exactly what you just did, describing an experience that suggests that their thoughts are hurt by somebody else's thoughts. How could we be hurt by someone else's thoughts if we recognize thoughts were just imagined? What would we be saying? Okay, they're having a thought. So what does that mean to me? It means they're having a thought. There's no influence on me. It doesn't offend me. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't attack me. There's nothing there to attack. It's the idea that these things I think I'm not thinking are starting to surface. And these experiences are actually giving me, in my experience, an opportunity to say, wow, I'm still harboring thoughts that aren't true as truth. And I can see it in the reactiveness I have, in the impulsiveness I have, in the compulsiveness I have. And I would suggest that in doing what I do, it's become clearer to me the depth of those ideas I keep seeming in the dark, because I'm still confronted, not as much as I was in the beginning, but the subtlety of it becomes more and more, to your point, Les. What I used to be numb to and ignoring, I all of a sudden started noticing is happening on a subtle level. And I want to address all of it, not some of it. I don't want to think I'm better because I don't feel as bad as I did last week. I want to be better because I'm better. I want to be healthy. And I want to admit it within my thinking. I want to admit it within my human experience. I don't just want to admit it at the spiritual level that I can't change anyhow. I want to admit that that was given to me as the potential capacity to express in my human experience, so the doing I do is valuable enough for others to be better too, and to notice that better. And my sense is communication, verbal communication, is one of the primary ways that we all, aside from the telepathic and visible connection, as one of the fundamental functions we do, one of the best ways to interact on this basis is to talk about it. We all talk better than we write, typically. So to fan the flames of a fire would be exactly what I have been doing whenever I try to make sense out of and rationalize something that's irrational. The individual thinking obsessive thoughts, when I'm thinking obsessive thoughts, I'm hearing what I think people are saying to support the contention that I'm right. So I'm not really having a conversation. It's not converting. It's a reinsistence. It's a demand. It's a presumption that what I'm hearing is what I'm hearing. And it takes a minute to start listening to people. But what it really takes, it doesn't really take a minute. It just identifies the denial I have to wanting to maintain those other thoughts. As I begin to listen, the listening is very different because I don't always know what to do with what people say. I do my best in this conversation, offer what I have in experience, because I know people coming here are coming for this purpose. And that's why my purpose is to confront and conflict if needed, to challenge ideas and thoughts, just to offer us an opportunity publicly with each other to have a conversation that actually illuminates some of this stuff rather than just try to make sense of it and not be able to make sense of it and try to talk to people about this can create a lot of reactivity, and it's not creating it, it's just recognizing the reactivity that many people that are thinking obsessively, and I would say anyone thinking obsessively, is going to come back with. If we can get better at doing it here honestly, we'll get better out there too. And that's where the practice really is. It's not here. This is part of the practice. The real practice is stepping back into our worlds and starting to address it in honest ways and notice the impact we've been creating on our experience and the sort of delusional impacts we've had in thinking we can't do certain things. We just give up and forget about it and postpone it, and I'll do it later, and then wonder why we're in a rush to get it done because it's imperative we get it finished. And we delay things and procrastinate. We don't put off procrastinating and yet struggle from procrastination. And I do all those things to some degree, but I know I do them, thoughts. They're not real, they're not true, they're thoughts. So when I witness that happening and hear those voices say, I'm depressed, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I know that what I'm frustrated and angry and depressed over is what I'm thinking first and foremost, period. That's the greatest impact on my experience. Nothing anyone else does can impact me as much as I think about what they do.
I don't blame. This is good. This is the part I like here that we're talking about. But I don't blame other people so much. I start criticizing so I can use it as like, well, it's constructive. I'm thinking of what I can do differently next time, or what I don't like that I do. That's where I go into the overthinking.
I find that hard to believe, Anthony.
True.
No. I want to be honest with you. You are a thoughtful person, but for a person that what you just said there would be if something happens and it bothers me or I don't like it, then what I do is I look at what I can do to not feel that way again. Then I should never have the same issue twice. But you've had the same issue for 3 years.
If it was actually a fix, right?
Yeah, good point.
So I mean, I'm just saying, I don't think that was genuine. That's all. I appreciate it, but I'm just saying, if we keep, you were describing it as insanity, Jack, and we all have our things that we fall back on, rely on, basis, whatever. And I'm just saying, and sometimes we're unwilling to let go of it, just like unwilling to let go of addiction, just like unwilling to let go of certain types of thoughts, certain types of beliefs. And that lack of willingness is often what leads to repetition, insanity, and discomfort. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, but if I'm not feeling comfortable, if I don't feel good, if it doesn't work for me, and I keep going against the same thing over and over and over again, and that doesn't matter who presents it, how I see it, then I'm not really doing what I should be able to do to let it go and accept reality, because clearly I'm not being in tune.
So part of the faultiness, Les, in your thinking is that you don't have the willingness, when I would suggest you have plenty of willingness to continue doing the wrong thing. You just can't match it with enough willingness on the other side. And when
but who wants to admit that?
Well, when you see things balanced,
I defer to Anthony on that.
Exactly. Well, if you're looking from within the context of that thinking, and Anthony, this goes for me and anyone who's got a brain, because if our brains function the same way, they dysfunction the same way. If I'm thinking of it from within the context of the thinking, and I think that context is going to provide an answer, I'm relying on the induced insanity to create reality again. It's never going to happen. And I can keep doing it. I have the absolute freedom to do it. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's the idea that doing it is going to finally pay off and give me what I hope for when the promise of a lie is a broken promise. But the promise, it's a broken promise in terms of what I think I'm going to get, but it's an absolute guaranteed promise that I'm going to get frustration and conflict and deficiency and scarcity as a result. Guaranteed all the time. People think they get ahead lying, but look at the people who have had what seems like everything completely destroy it and end up in prison because of manipulating some small aspect to get a little more. It goes on a lot. The Roman Empire, Attila the Hun, the Egyptian Empire, all these empires, the Mayan, Aztec, all of them don't exist anymore in the form they did. At some point, the weakness, it, like a disease, just takes over and completely destroys everything. It can't be outrun. And why not come to terms with it now? What I learned is that objectivity is seeing both my own thinking and the consequences of that thinking simultaneously as the same thing rather than separate. So if I'm thinking something and I'm feeling bad, I say, okay, it's bad thinking that I'm feeling. Very simple, very, very simple. As I began to start conceding those things, I started to get a greater awareness of the things that I was doing at a deeper level. It became clearer. I had a panic attack because all of the tension, the charge that I had denied for years that was built up in my body as fear, all of that anxiety is fear being held. And some of that fear is due. There are certain risks we come up against. Being afraid of those risks is an honest appraisal of those risks. When we're the one creating the risk and think we're not creating the risk, that risk continues to grow and grow and grow and grow until we finally come to terms with it. And a moment of clarity and a bottom, as far as I'm concerned, is when I decide to stop digging deeper any further and looking further rather than just the immediacy of my experience and say it's happening. What's happening now is what I'm struggling with. There is no other struggle. And if what I'm struggling with is insane right now, admitting it would certainly be significant step forward. Thank you, sweetheart. My smoothie has arrived in both respects. If I'm treating it as though it's something I can't do anything about, or the only thing I can do is a new face on the old pig, I'm just perpetuating it. So I can do that. I'm free to do that. I do that. I don't have to do it. I'm not bound to do it. I'm not condemned to do it. Those are all things I create to be a victim to it and think that I have nothing to do with it. So ponder these things. And as you're willing to look more accurately at what's happening, and I'll tell you, it's very easy because when you start noticing that any disturbance you're having, if you're looking at disturbance that's disturbing, it's no longer as disturbing as thinking it's not disturbing. It doesn't become engulfing. You don't feel consumed by it. You will actually feel the feelings associated to it. And my experience is that those are often sad and filled with a degree of grief and mourning and loss for the ignorance of that moment that I missed, that time I had, that opportunity I had that's gone, that isn't going to come back. And it's the exact same experience of witnessing someone die. The finality of it, the absolute nature of it is very, very hard to deal with when I think it should be some other way, and very profoundly spontaneous to think of it as being something that's absolutely natural, part of the arc, why we're here, part of why we're here. And if we see the entirety of our life's existence as humans in that way, we see the opportunity of what we're doing, the beginning and end of things, the commitments we can make to things, the achievements we can gain, as something not only possible, but absolutely probable, rather than impossible and improbable. You've had enough achievements to appreciate those things. So I'm going to call this an end to this discussion today, which is our 101st
Thanks, Jack.
podcast.
Thanks, Les.
And see you guys around campus. Love you.
Bye, guys.